It's my great honour to welcome you all.
It is a very prestigious award. It means the world to me.
They have great senses of humour.
I like to reveal parts of history to them, for I love making history come alive.
They are some of the best people that you can come across.
To help them open their hearts.
I always come back to this quote. How can we be role models to learners if we're not learners ourselves?
It's quite useful to get out of our bubbles, not our COVID ones, and sort of see what else is out there.
By sharing best practice, we can see the whole picture. We can see what really matters.
One of the biggest brains around.
It's easy to forget how much has to happen behind the front lines.
As a global schools group, Cognita educates over 55,000 students across 12 countries. We're proud to be Wellbeing Partner at this year's Festival of Education, and we want to share the work that we're doing to prioritise children's well-being. This starts with a clear understanding of what well-being is. We looked at the evidence and created a simple Be Well charter that everyone can use day to day. It gives a clear definition of well-being and then focuses on the specific contributors that influence it. Discover our full Be Well charter video and other resources to use with your students and families at cognita.com.
I really try to not look at myself as just a science teacher. I feel like as a teacher, it's very important to help students grow and develop outside of your lessons. A single teacher believing in you and really believing in you. One teacher doing that can have a large impact, but if you have one or two or three all telling you that and really, really believing in it, it makes you feel like you can achieve anything in the world, honestly.
Welcome to this Festival of Education keynote session, part of the annual Festival of Education, taking place online from the 16th to the 30th of June. This year's festival is free for all teachers and educationalists across education in the UK and beyond. This has only been possible thanks to the support of our incredible partners. A huge thank you to our headline partner, Pearson, our festival partners, BBC Bitesize, Cognita and Teach First, our literary festival partner, Bloomsbury Publishing, and our organising partner, Wellington College, the home of the Festival of Education. We'd also like to thank our incredible speakers. Over 200 leading educationalists and thought leaders will be providing sessions at this year's festival. On behalf of the audience and organisers, thank you. It's time to sit back and get set for our upcoming keynote session. If you wish to ask a question during this session, please head over to our Slido page to submit questions and vote for your favourites. Enjoy this Festival of Education keynote session.
Chester, if you can go on mute, please.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Festival of Education. It's another great day. It's a grey day. In fact, it's not a great day. Where's the sunshine gone? My name is Catherine Templer-Lewis and I'm a futurist and a creative scientist. And I'm here to speak and then moderate the key debate, which is preparing for 2041, the future of life, work and education. So a massive topic. So for the next 60 minutes, that's what we're going to be discussing. Now we have an incredible panel who will be there, but also we want you to talk. This is a two-way dialogue. So there's the Slido, which I'm sure you can all, a year into digital can use. So do throw questions at us because we have myself and we have Cindy Rampersad, the Senior Vice President, BTEC and Apprenticeships for Pearson. We have Charlotte Wheeler, the co-founder of the Oak Montessori and also a specialist in metacognition. We have Sunita Allen, who's the Master at Jesus College, Cambridge, and Chester King, the founder and CEO of the British eSport Association. So that's what we're here to talk about. The provocation we have is what will work in society look like in the future? We're going to explore how current trends might develop over the next 20 years and how can education and learning help us prepare. Now, first of all, I wanted to start with something I get asked a lot as a futurist. Now, the way I work is I sort of sit at the intersection of culture, humans and society. Myself, I am a human scientist. I'm a neuroscientist and geneticist. If you get up early enough on a Saturday morning, you'll probably see me on Sky TV making sort of science fun and accessible. The thing I believe in more than anything is humans and human-first technology. And we're sitting at this point in time, which is the pandemic, which I didn't predict. The most embarrassing thing happened to me. My mother predicted it, aged 80, and I told her she was being ridiculous. So that's how I started 2019. I was outdone by my own mother. Now I'm going to share my screen with you. Hopefully you should all see something saying the future in education. Because I want to ask this question, what does the future look like? Now, it's interesting, if you Google the future, you get this. You get either these wonderful pictures of this sort of very dry and boring looking utopia, or these rather awful pollution-filled dystopia. What I believe in is something called protopia, which is a future that we build ourselves, which obviously has mistakes, because no one's perfect, but is actually progressively trying to advance where society is. This, interestingly, was 100 years ago what they predicted the future of the classroom was going to look like in the year 2000, which I love. And this is actually, now, I said this is a classroom in 2000. This is not everybody's classroom in 2000. I'm very, very aware that this is a very privileged person's classroom. So what did we get wrong? This is what futurists, the greatest futurists at the time in the 80s, said the world would look like in 2019. This is Blade Runner. Actually, most of the things you can see do exist, from the flying car, it does exist, it's called the black fly, through to the smog and the pollution. This is what I predicted the future of the workplace would look like. In fact, in about 2 years' time, I said at one point it would be in 2020, we'd all be sort of hot desking on beaches with the slash generation with 1,000 careers. This is a very sanitized picture of what the future did look like in 2020. That is probably the best day you would have had trying to work at home whilst homeschooling. But the question I really want to ask is, why do we get it wrong? And why, in many senses, do we refuse to predict the future? Because it's really irresponsible and it's really dangerous. And it has a direct impact backwards on how education then develops. There's this thing called future blindness, which Kevin Kelly from Wired pointed out, which is this overwhelm we get when we try and look at the future and try and predict the future. The problem with it is it stops us creating the future. I'm a huge, huge believer in this, that the future shouldn't happen to us, we need to create it. And that starts at the level of education. And yes, the pandemic was unpredicted, but what it didn't do was actually change the course we were on. It just accelerated trends, digital trends mainly, and it highlighted, it made us think about the future. There was this huge gap where all we had, it was like we were sent on the naughty step by the universe to think about what we did. And we didn't. We just lied and said we learned yoga. And then it sort of did it to us 3 times. And on the 3rd lockdown, we kind of actually addressed the future. It made us talk about the future. And it made us realize that there's this opportunity. So where have we got to? The first thing that comes up when you ask people about the future is they say, well, we're living in the age of uncertainty. And I get that. We are very much, how can we prepare people for this uncertain world that could go in every direction? And actually uncertainty is the key driver of anxiety and a key driver of mental illness. And that's a big problem. Now, interestingly, from a neuroscience perspective, people sit on a continuum of how well they can tolerate uncertainty. I'm doing a great project with a guy called Sam Knief right now called the Uncertainty Experts. And what we found working with UCL is that people who are intolerant of uncertainty, they just get really anxious, and it tends to hamper their productivity in the workplace. People who are very tolerant of it are incredibly creative and can use uncertainty to create new ideas. So the first question is, if it's going to be uncertain, how do we prepare kids? Now, we know this, emotional resilience, and this is weaving its way into every single curriculum. It absolutely is. In fact, the point where I pointed out to someone the other day that probably adults should be doing courses in emotional resilience. We're nailing the fact that our kids have to get it. And it's not just this sort of transferable skills. We've got that. We know this about social skills. And we're also getting to this point where we realize the future is going to be interdisciplinary. I can't even say that word. I really struggle with it, even though it's what I do as a profession. And it's what I teach at UCL on the BASC. And very much we've acknowledged that the challenges that we're facing as a society are cross-discipline. They need interdisciplinary thinking and skills. Problem-solving skills, creativity skills, collaboration skills, and that is slower to get into the curriculum, but it is slowly getting there. We see it, for example, in the BASC that I teach at UCL, the London Interdisciplinary University that's just sprung up. Things like that. A lot of the academies are starting to do this type of thinking. Efficiency and knowledge is not as high as it used to be, but asking questions and collaborating is. So how do we predict the jobs that we'll be doing in 2040? The first thing, of course, is there's the 2 things as a futurist you look at. You look at trends and you look at technology. Everyone loves looking at trends. And we are entering the 4th industrial revolution, in fact, which is sort of coming at us at all sides, at all speeds. Technology, AI, all those sort of different technology trends. Now, again, there is a huge digital divide that we have to be aware of. And it's very easy as a futurist to talk about technology, forgetting that most people have been left behind at the moment when it comes to technology, and that includes young people. But it is, we have these big trends. We have climate change, we have aging populations, personalized medicine, technology itself, automation, AI, XR, which is all the things like sort of virtual reality and augmented reality. And we're doing a good job at looking at those trends. This is from, in fact, a document done by Pearson and Nesta, and it's brilliant, about the future of education for 2030. And it really highlighted the skills that need to be in greater demand for the future: interpersonal skills, high order cognitive skills, system skills. And they did, yes, look at trends, globalization, population aging, urbanization, the rise of the green economy, all those things. And what professions do we need? Sustainability professions, old age care professions, city planning, space exploration. But the sweet spot really comes when we look at how technology drives this. And what I found in a lot of my work is that we don't look at technology hard enough. We sort of dismiss technology. We sort of sit between hating technology and believing that it's going to be some sort of Terminator future, which it's not. I've done a lot of studying this, and it's not at all. Because what we're finding now is that we've suddenly realized a lot of technology is a bit useless, pointless, and detrimental to our health. So there is going to be this big move to human-first technology, where we put the human at the center. We go back to old-fashioned technology, like the wheel, like fire, that makes us faster, enhances, elevates what we can do as humans. And it's this technology that's going to be driving the jobs, because we only ever see this sort of small slice of what the future holds for us. Yes, things like computers, energy sources, manufacturing practices, this is all going to change jobs. But we tend to just look at this sort of rough outline. There's something more clever you can do, and I challenge you all to go off and do this and look at what's called secondary effects. The business technologies and models that are going to be based on top of this. And so an example of that is sort of, known newspaperman sort of looked at a mainframe computer and saw social media or Instagram or influencers or websites. That's a secondary effect. And in this sense, we need to stop looking at professions and look at technology. You know, technology is not going to get rid of professions. ATM machines did not get rid of bank tellers. What it meant was it freed up time to make them more efficient. And it also built a whole profession around that technology. You know, so we need to think about technology itself. Now, these, a bit boring, I know, these are the biggest trends in technology at the moment that are going to drive jobs in 2040. And we need to be thinking around these. You know, we've got robots, data, all of these you will know, drones, fusion power, CRISPR, biohacking, quantum computers, mixed reality, all of these. And I'm, you know, happy to send anybody a whole list of these. But within these are more and more jobs. So, I mean, I can pick one out, like robots. So we're going to need robot monitoring, robot operation technology, robot suppliers, robot programmers, robot UX experts, robot ethicists, robots business developers. You know, you can do the same with data. We're going to need data brokers, data detectives, data trackers, data analysts, monitors, ethicists, you know, data trust officers, all these things. I'll pick another one. What's one right down at the bottom? You know, even AI, you know, AI enhanced jobs. So we'll have AI enhanced musicians, writers, quantum programmers, AI enhanced cybersecurities. So that's my sort of next challenge. So the first challenge is to sort of look beyond transferable skills. The second one is to look closer at technology itself and work backwards from that. And human first technology, that's the key. That's the guiding lodestar of that. But before we move on to the panel, I want to do a third challenge as well, because this comes up a lot. Now, this is a very skewed statistic and no one's entirely sure where it comes from, but it pops up a lot. The 65% of students today will live will be in jobs that don't yet exist. I think that's a bit of a cop-out. I think that's a bit irresponsible of us to put that. Because they're jobs that actually, you know, is it that they won't exist, or that because of future blindness, we just haven't imagined yet? You know, because of the overwhelm of this responsibility of building a future, of co-creating a future, of letting young people build a future, is it that we just don't imagine them? You know, back to this point, the future shouldn't just happen to us. We should really try and create it. So it sort of all comes together on this point, really. Yes, the future is going to be really uncertain, and we do need emotional resilience. There's always going to be a degree of uncertainty. And, you know, and we need these interdisciplinary skills as well to face the challenges that make it so uncertain as well. There will be new jobs based around whole sections of technology in itself. And we do need creativity. You know, the creativity has come up as the one for the, you know, the World Economic Forum said it's the one skill set we need over the next 20 years to do really well in jobs. But in my opinion, it's not just this creativity we need in order to do cross-discipline thinking, in order to do all these collaborations. It's the creativity we need to create new sort of social, cultural narratives for the future, because our ones are really broken. The whole linear ones we're handing down to young people are really wrong. You know, we need to build these new social narratives. And within that, we need to start asking them, you know, what are the jobs we need to fulfill these narratives? And what do they want to be doing? And how do we help them get there? You know, there's all these speculative futures courses, and I love them. And I teach on many of them, although I realize I've actually spelled it wrong there. Let me on that side. But no, it's really, speculative futures is really important, because we have to get over this future blindness. And future blindness is increasing. Overwhelm is increasing. The more we stress, the more we put our head in the sand. You know, I look at trends in technology, but it really, really only takes us so far. We need to be working with young people. We need to be having a conversation with them about the future that they want. And then we owe it to them to help them build that and what jobs they need for that. You know, I think it's irresponsible and flawed to say we can't predict the jobs of the future. And all we can do is teach kids to be adaptable. Because I believe, you know, we can teach them to imagine and create and be future builders and future creators as well. So we need sort of, you know, the sum up really is that we need to engage young people in these conversations. What futures do they want to live in? What will be those jobs? And yes, we know we need more than emotional resilience. We need interdisciplinary skills. And yes, we need to look at human first technology. But we need to start to teach mindsets as well and help them be future builders. I put this slide in just because I really like it. That's what someone said 2020 would look like. I'm like, where's my balloon bike? You know, we do get it wrong. But this, I think, this is a great professor of education. If you want to have a look him up, at the end of the day, as well as equipping them with skills, we need to start being, as a whole population, future builders. We have this, it's what we call a black swan event right now. It will happen once in our lifetime, the pandemic, an event where there's a pause and we can actually just step out of society's fit and go, okay, what's our future going to be? And young people are driving that as well. So I'm going to finish on another great education icon of mine, which is Snoop Dogg. He always said, be ready so you don't have to get ready. So that's why we're here having these conversations. And I'm going to bring it now over to the whole panel because they all have so much more information to add and so many different perspectives. And it is about this conversation because actually no one quite knows yet. So in that space, we should be creating the future. So I'm going to stop sharing there. Happy that worked. Brilliant. Thank you. So it's just over 15 minutes. So I'm going to bring the panel in on this now because, like I said, everybody here has a very different perspective on where the future's headed, and it's going to need this sort of collaboration between us all. Can everybody see me? They're not screen shared, are they? Perfect. So welcome everybody. First of all, I was just going to actually get you to just introduce yourself and just sort of see what you think the biggest transformation we're heading for towards 2040 is. I don't know if everybody is on the same side as me, but Sunita, you're the person directly to my right. So if you're happy, I'll start with you, and then go to Cindy, Esther, and then Charlotte. So Sunita, welcome.
Thank you, Catherine. That was really interesting. I am, as we speak, getting ready to get into my space tech crew kind of new career. That's the one for me. I was looking at this thinking, what can I go for? I'm a master of Jesus College. I took up the role 2 years ago. I took it up because I like helping people. And I would get really excited. There's an energy. I think everyone at the Festival of Education shares that energy around young people and helping people get ahead, and all ages as well. I think I know one of the panelists might talk to that a bit more. But you asked the questions about what those big transformations are. We talk a lot about the digital divide, and I'm sure that's going to get touched on a bit later. But the thing I notice is the communication divide. I think there's people who will talk up, people who will get their views expressed. And we're constantly kind of saying, hey, how do you get to the back of the room? How do you get to the person at the back of the room who might have some really great ideas, but they're not coming forward? How do you get people to have the idea of talking as something that they constantly do? Because in order for our ideas to thrive, or for that interdisciplinary approach to actually really happen, it actually calls for people to talk about ideas, to talk about the things, the way in which they can bring together parts of the world and go, right, we're going to stick it together a bit differently, because that's the real creativity there. Obviously there's other things as well, which are things like the environmental agenda, where I think there's an expectation which is building through society at a very, very kind of grassroots level, and it's going to touch on everything we do, what we decide to buy, what we decide to invest in. The biggest investments might be in renewables. Also, those in terms of jobs. Recently PwC said they were looking to employ 100,000 extra people to look at the regulation and advising around ESG. So I think you can see there's a really kind of big push there. And as someone, I came into education, I did philosophy, but I came in to do computer science. I've always been interested in AI. I think there is a real interesting crossover where AI is really is creeping into the creative industries. In the way that you've got programs to make music, will someone write a script? My partner's a screenwriter. I hope he stays in work because he can write scripts. But I think those are things that I think are going to be impacting us in the future, as well as final things, health, preventative health versus reactive health. I think there's some amazing things happening in the biotech industry at the moment, and I think that's going to be by 2041. It's going to be very exciting.
Yeah, thank you. And as 100% agreed, I think it's that whole well-being piece is something that I didn't touch on, but it's also been highlighted by the pandemic and really important. And sort of alongside it, as personalised medicine and things like CRISPR technology advances, we're going to see a whole change in that. So thank you. Cindy, what are your sort of thoughts and reflections on where we're headed?
I think in terms of where we're heading, I think all the points that you made about digital are right. And I think thinking about how digital is embedded in education, but also in all our lives and will be more and more. And digital is partly about convenience. So there are a number of things that we can do without, but actually digital provides it in a different way, or it's faster. But obviously it's then influencing what's happening around transformation of industries and new roles that you talked about. But I wanted to kind of come back to education and learning, actually, in terms of 2040. And I think there are a few things, and you touched on this, but I think the single most important thing in learning and education going forward, one is the embedding of human qualities in curriculum. And I think so stuff like teamwork and empathy and respect and the ability to network and the ability to communicate and work in different ways. We're having to communicate here on Zoom, which we wouldn't have done, 16 months ago. But I think I came into education later in terms of work. And I remember when I left City and Islington College, where I'd spent 4.5 years, at my leaving do, the thing that I'd said as part of my speech was, my reflection was that the one thing that made a difference in education was enrichment. So all of those extracurricular activities that includes things like teamwork and project work and the creatives and sports and being able to speak, being able to embed that in our curriculum, I think, is going to be the game changer. And not just the game changer, it's going to be necessary, because if we are going to operate in a world that is going to be changing drastically, and what's relevant in terms of skills changes from 1 month or 1 year to the next, we need to embed all of that in our curriculum. And I think from early years. There's another bit in terms of adults, this whole bit around lifelong learning, which I'm sure we'll come on to. And if roles are going to change that quickly, like Chester, like Sunita, like all of you on this call, we've had multiple careers. I've had multiple careers. And the next generation are going to have even more, and they're going to work differently as well as study differently. I think, the ecosystem of having a portfolio career. I mentor a young man, and he has, really inspirational young man, but he has a portfolio career already in new industries, in digital media and digital marketing. So I think more of that will be prevalent, and learning, having to keep up with that and to support people. And the other bit for me is I think people will be more values driven. And I know we've been through the pandemic. I don't know if it is once in a generation. I think, maybe quite like your 80-year-old mother, but actually this could happen again and again, and we'll have to learn to adapt and live with that. But I think young people will care more about mental health, about work-life balance. I know we've been saying it, about the environment, and I think that will drive some of the industries. So when I see those industries on that sheet, I don't see things like it is, but how retail might shift to being about recycling of clothes and rental of clothes, rather than consuming and owning. Will it be about sharing and rental in some instances? So I think there are a number of things that are going to shift around values, environment, but at the heart of it, for young people, it's about enrichment and the human elements, the human qualities in curriculum, and for adults, it's lifelong learning.
Brilliant, thank you. And it's interesting you came back to that same point sort of around values as well. And I love that term, enrichment, because I'm sort of getting quite, well-being for me becomes a bit of a hollow term, but I think if there's more than well-being, is much more holistic. Enrichment is really, really interesting. Chester, I know sort of you come from sort of the different direction. It's something that you spoke on, Sydney, upskilling as well. Obviously, gaming and esports and things like that, there's a huge element now of that being around how we learn. So how do you see it sort of shaping the future?
Yeah, so just to clarify, so esports is competitive video gaming. So it's always human versus human. So using technology. So gaming can be against a computer. Esports is you're always playing against another human or humans. So it's really interesting to see. And, not that I should say it, the last kind of 18 months has been incredible growth in esports, and actually it's been incredible for mental health because people can still be social and competitive. And we've helped a lot of organizations and charities and the government and a number of armed forces help combat loneliness and use technology, the human interface through esports. So we, because of the kind of the activity we've done, it's actually stemmed or forced us to create future jobs and qualifications around that. And we've got a partnership with Pearson, which is great. And I think for me, one of the questions, or the title is Life, Work and Education 2040. I think we're going to see a lot more jobs around people's passions, or the ability to have jobs around people's passions as well. I mean, my uncle actually went to Cambridge, he studied law, and he became a songwriter, right? And he actually made a fortune being a songwriter, but he didn't study that, and he wished, maybe he should have done. So I'm seeing optically at the beginning, and it's such a cliche, but I'm really right at the beginning of the future of esports. And we're seeing colleges creating esports hubs and clusters. As Exeter College and Queen Mary's and Basingstoke have just opened their first esports classroom to teach esports qualifications, in the first year of the esports BTEC's happening now. And so you talked about resilience in life. You're being taught these qualities by playing esports, very passionate as well. So for me, I'm 50 years old. I'm definitely on my second career. I've been in esports for 6 years, but my main business, which I am still involved with, is building and running hospitals for governments. So we're building 3 in the Middle East, 1 in Africa and 1 in China. And I agree with Sunita around preventative healthcare and what the advancements in that's happening, and just the new roles that are happening that as well. So for me, what I'm seeing, granularly is definitely esports as a huge sector, and helping sport understand. The president of the IOC said that every sport needs to have a gaming strategy, which is a huge statement and position. And then I think around healthcare, we're going to see a lot. So I'm really excited about the future, but without sounding cliche, it's starting now, and people are starting to think about that. And I'm living my life through my 20-year-old, my 18-year-old, my 4-year-old, and just seeing how their perception of education is changing and evolving.
Yeah, and that's an amazing range to have kids, because you can actually see all the things they need at different stages. And I think it is, it's been really interesting. A lot of people, a lot of parents as well, with homeschooling, have had to suddenly focus on their kids' education in a very new way. I think there's been a massive appreciation for teachers as well. But which brings me actually to Charlotte, because you do have your multifaceted, in fact, in terms of sort of what you do, in terms of the things you believe in and you teach. So how do you see this all panning out?
Well, I mean, it's so fascinating to hear you all discuss it. And from a primary and secondary perspective, when I'm going into schools and talking to them and their teachers and their heads of departments about what they're doing to do their best in terms of future proofing, it's fascinating, because things like pandemics, climate change, that sense of mental health, and obviously statistics are on the rise, and they're on the rise younger as well. Thinking about just that sense of inclusivity, of community, how we build empathy in our classrooms, how we start approaching classrooms, perhaps not just from an academic point of view, but from a whole child performance point of view, how well we really get to know them. And I lead up the motivation work at Thinking Matters. So we are on a journey with over 1,000 schools now, and we've had a lot of growth in this area in terms of having metacognitive learners who are self-reflective learners, building in that sense of self-reflection. And I think, it's fascinating for us, because I also own and co-founded a nursery in Wimbledon, and we've obviously got these little 2-year-olds joining us right now who have had incredibly little human contact prior to starting. We have our 3- and 4-year-olds who have been told it's dangerous to hug granny. You can't have a party this year, I'm afraid. Your older brother can't have a sports day where the parents are watching. There's lots of things that are quite risk averse. And in my motivation work that's heavily linked with motivational maps and James Sale, and particularly based around Maslow's hierarchy of needs, going back to to the behaviour iceberg, the pyramid, Maslow's pyramid of what we need as human beings to thrive and to work up towards that level of self-efficacy, and what it is to feel happy, what it is to feel fulfilled. You know, what does success mean for me? Just taking half an hour in a year to kind of think about what makes me tick. How is that different to what makes my best friend tick? Maybe even my worst enemy tick. Thinking about those sorts of things in a secondary setting. I've done some fascinating work this year with Wimbledon High, who have put that at the forefront of their pastoral systems there. But equally looking at the little ones at the Oak Montessori in Wimbledon, you know, for us, it was just, you know, such a golden opportunity to see a bowling pavilion completely sort of falling down and thinking how amazing for city kids to be able to come to a green learning environment every day, waltzing into their local park to come and learn. And we've got the Forest School and largely Montessori focused curriculum there, thinking about the natural curiosity, really placing a lot of worth on critical thinking from an early age, thinking outside the box, being creative, but also finding your purpose. Why wait for school to start when that can start at 2? Why do we need to think about growth mindsets? So really, when we're thinking, Natasha Rodrigo and I, about that start in life, that start of an educational journey, we're thinking that our 2-year-olds in 2041, they might not be going into office blocks. They might be working transatlantically from their bedrooms on their own. Perhaps they're going to be holding down 3 jobs rather than 1. What can we do to be initiating dialogue and important discussions and learning from the word go? And along with, you know, being in the centre of park, feeling the rhythm of nature, understanding that we all have seasons as human beings, as well as nature and Mother Nature herself, where we might want to go and hide into a cave one day, but on others, you know, it's spring-like or it's summer. And I think feeling the rhythm of the environment, building that sense of unity with little people and their brains and the way in which they see the world, global citizens of the future, is what we feel we really need.
I love that. I love that sort of piece about, you know, the more and more we're understanding that nature connection is, well, it's the key driver of what we in neuroscience call PEB, which is really boring. It's pro-environmental behavior, but it is something we've definitely lost. So I suppose it sort of brings us back to the question, because we talked about sort of the technology that's driving jobs. We talked about the values that's driving it, as well as trends. So how do you balance this, you know, in terms of the skill sets that you teach kids? How do you balance this, you know, need to understand technology and how that's driving us on one hand, need to connect to nature and the values of sustainability, and I don't know how hard, an answer is, but what sort of, and do put your hand up if you want to be the first to speak on this. How do you see that ending up in a curriculum and ending up in that balance? And is it possible? Are we on track? Sunita, perhaps you'd like to, do you have any comments?
Yeah, no, because you posed the question in terms of the need around technology or sustainability. I think those are things which are just there anyway, and between the course of now and 2040, they're just a kind of reality of life. And I think actually the thing that should be built into, if there's a possibility to build it more into the curriculum, is to build change into the curriculum. I think a lot of schools organise around the class, and obviously within a pandemic you have to stay in your class bubbles. As we move out of this, I hope, actually wouldn't it be great if there was more change built in, so you didn't stick with the same people all the way through a year, that there was actually a day a week where all the classes mixed up and you had to kind of meet other people, because that's what life is like. Or you actually took on some of the stuff which is happening now and said, okay, right, half a day a week you're going to do stuff more on Zoom. How are you presenting yourself? How are you lighting yourself? How are you answering questions? And doing things like that. But I do think we should build in more change and building more challenge and more tasks, because in a way it's that principle of saying, well, if we want people to be flexible and cope with different jobs, we'll actually get them to do it all the way through. There's a thing as well, I think, that in order to kind of shift and change and say, right, I will have a portfolio career, it's much more sales focused. You have to be much more sales focused in yourself. And I think that in order to do that, you have to be able to take risk. And it's often struck me as if you look at primary school, stuff's on the wall all the time. There's your creative risk. It's up on the wall. Why does that stop at secondary? We stop doing it, and then as adults, we then get worried about putting ourselves out there, putting our creativity out there. So I think there's something around there where we think, well, what are the things that we're not doing, and we're stopping at primary that we should be doing? But I definitely think the idea of changing things up, you're not with the same people all the time. I know that one thing I've always done, as a parent, was if my child was ever going to a class or a club, I'd never say to him, why don't you invite a friend? It just, no, go. And then he got very used to just going and being the only person he knew there and just talking. And as a result, he's just very, very sociable.
Which is great as an adult, because it means you can network really well. And I think I remember with Cindy, you brought up this idea of empathy, which now we realise is a key leadership skill, especially in an environment of diversity, which is also key for businesses. You need to have empathy. You need to be very empathetic to understand people from diverse backgrounds. Charlotte, I saw you had your hand up.
Actually, I think that Sunita's kind of reference to change really touches a chord with me, because in my motivation work, we look at these three clusters of the motivators that we all have in us as human beings, and some of those are growth focused, and those children who have a high cluster of growth in their motivational profile, which is always in flux, by the way, because unlike personality that's fairly fixed, motivations do change. But thinking about that, you've got children who are future friendly, they're future focused, they love change, they're the entrepreneurial spirits, they're going to be the entrepreneurs in the future. Really fascinatingly, we've discovered that a lot of children with learning differences or difficulties, they often have that really key driver. They can jump from A to Z very quickly, and the nature of change is kind of quite welcome to them. Whereas you have other children who might have sort of relationship focused sort of motivators that are quite past focused, that will have actually really struggled throughout this pandemic, because they're the children when something's called off, that it's sort of, well, what's going to happen, and are we going to have the match again, and which teacher's going to cover for the teacher that they've got 101 questions, and they are highly motivated by that sense of security and stability, that base of the Maslow pyramid. And I sort of think that, thinking about the children right now in our primary and secondary schools, particularly primary, where every day there's something different, there's a change. I saw a group of year 3 girls walking across the common yesterday crying because they weren't allowed to go into school because there'd been a case. All of these stop, turn, twist. I think as adults, I'm finding it very difficult to adapt to that level of change, but maybe the children currently at school who are getting used to this sense of adaptability, of flexibility, I think it could well serve them really well in the future.
It's really interesting, that, isn't it? Perhaps we're sort of thinking poor kids, they're going to be really disturbed by this, but maybe it's probably as adults being isolated that we have been, because actually, they've had less threat, they've had less sort of impact in the sense of insecurity. So I suppose, it's sort of interesting, that sort of idea of like who got to go into school and who didn't, of course, because it highlighted in Cindy and Chester, I know there's something that's very important to you, that digital divide as well. People's experience in school in the pandemic often really related to digital divide. And now, Cindy and Chester, you both have thoughts on this. Cindy, I'll go to you first, and then I'll bring it to you.
I wanted to answer the question about the curriculum and the learning of the future, actually, if that's okay, because I think things like numeracy, literacy, digital skills are kind of a given. One of the things I wonder about is whether or not curriculum is relevant, and actually what we need to do is make sure curriculum is updated regularly, so it's not static, so actually we're teaching the right stuff. And I think about vocational pathways in particular, and the example with Chester and the partnerships is a great example, where it's a new industry and there's a vocational pathway to make sure people can access it, so choice in the system. But the other thing I was going to say, and it links really to what Charlotte was saying, is that I did only come into education 10 years ago, and I'm surrounded by 3 notable academics on this course. I should be really careful. But every child is different. And it's interesting, I read an article about autism recently, and the kind of different spectrums and the impact and the ways of learning, and introverts versus extroverts. I think one of the challenges for us as we move forward is our curriculum and the way we teach. To your point, Charlotte, is or I think Catherine said it's very classroom based, and actually there is something around looking at difference and looking at choice and looking at different pathways and actually celebrating that actually a child might not have learning difficulties. It might just be that child learns this way. And that way is probably the right way. So the thing I've been struck by in my short time in education is the snobbery towards vocational. And I had an academic background like many of you on this call, but actually vocational is right for many and might be more relevant for many going forward. So thinking about how we embed that increasingly in curriculum, I think is important. So that was the point I wanted to cover off. And I'm going to let Chester cover the point on the digital divide, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yes, Chester, your thoughts, because you're so embedded in technology.
Yeah, so a few things. So we actually were quite lucky as an industry. So during the last 18 months, we were the only after school club that carried on throughout the whole last year and a half. So we run an esports championships, the national championships in the UK that schools and colleges participate. We've got our finals in 2 weeks' time at Confetti College in Nottingham. And it was fantastic because it's so inclusive. You can be any shape, any color, any sex, playing esports, human versus human. So for us, we were very lucky about that to keep that going. The digital divide for us gets very granular. For us, it's more about the ping rate is the digital issue. So a ping rate is the latency when you're playing and competing in esports. So it's not about how good your computer is, it's how good is the ping rate. So in esports, you go into a subcategory of the digital divide of that. But when 5G starts rolling out, and this again is, by 2040, we might have 6G or 7G, but 5G will be such a huge difference for our industry, but I think also for education and what you can download and how you learn. And there are, unfortunately, some schools and colleges that don't have adequate broadband or internet. So I think 5G rollout would be significant. And I think, as I say, by 2040, it's something different. I would pick up on what Sunita said about change and the difference between, and Charlotte, around primary schools and what happens at secondary schools. And what I've noticed is, unfortunately, in primary school, my 4-year-old daughter, she's in a mixed class, she does mixed sports. As soon as you go to secondary school, there's a segregation that comes up, especially around sports. And I think that can generate some form of toxicity. And we've seen that around certain titles in esports where you get more men than girls playing. And I think I'd love to see, a challenge education about to be more inclusive, not only, and not have this separation. I know there's a physicality issue in certain sports, and I get that, but I feel that the education sector can help that in society. And then also picking up on Cindy about, the reality situation, there is a huge ability in our world to escape reality and go into virtual reality and play things and do things that you can't do. And on one level, is that escapism? Does that help with your mental health? Doing something that makes you happy. I know we're doing some big research with Imperial College around dementia prevention, about improving your memory function, and virtual reality is really helping that, and esports is helping that. So as I say, I'm so in the coalface of what we're doing, and we feel very lucky that we're delivering an activity, or people are wanting a career in something that they're passionate about, but also the skills that they're learning are transferable into other sectors. And I think people are going to be living longer. People are going to be living to their hundreds, so their careers are going to be longer as well. So just going back to the topic about, I keep addressing the subject matter, life, work, and education. I think there's going to be this fusion in the future that if you can work, I'm very privileged to work in a job that I generally love doing, and I don't feel like it's a job. I feel that it's part of my life. And I think it's all about experiences. And as I say, I think you're going to see hopefully more people having that choice to work in a career that they're passionate about, rather than doing a career that they're doing to make money from. And I think that's that'd be fantastic. And that's what I hope with the advance of technology, that's going to help us do.
Thank you. I was going to say that's sort of the perfect sort of point to come to about like what your sort of vision of the future is. It's interesting. One of the Slido questions is, will esports start to be offered as sort of social prescribing, or should it be? And for people who don't know, social prescribing is a way of GPs being able to send people to alternative forms of treatment or therapy or things that boost well-being, be it forest walks to esports. So it's sort of interesting that you're doing work with Imperial College, and that sort of, you see that on the future. And you're right, you mentioned something I didn't mention at all, which is, everyone born today probably in the Western world in a position where they have access to healthcare will live to 100. What does that mean for us all? Which sort of brings me in the last 10 minutes really to that point that you make, Chester. What is on the horizon? What do we see? What do we hope for? What do we want change? And perhaps just in a few minutes each, if you could just each answer sort of your vision for the future, really, or your hopes for the future. Perhaps, Anita, if you could start.
Okay, yeah, I'll start. If I think about the macro picture, I think there have been some big shifts. We talk about the pandemic, but there's other big shifts that have happened. Movement of people, less of that. I hope for the future that more of the jobs in society get a lift. People kind of get exposed to more ideas. There's more value given to jobs which we previously hadn't. Care, NHS, agriculture, hospitality. I think those are all jobs which there's a real need. I think there's, Cindy talked about the lack of more recyclables. I think we're shifting to a point where we have less stuff. And in a way, it's driven by technology. I mean, you've got your Kindle, you've got your book. Homes of the future will have less shelves because we will store less things on them. There'll be less, I think, that idea of reusing things. The provenance of what we do, that's going to really come through. And I hope that for the future as well. On a school level, in terms of thinking about the curriculum, we have a big challenge in that we will have more kind of learning which happens via VR and AR. There is a digital divide there, I think. Chester talked about the ping rate, but actually for schools, how do you kind of cope with that? I mean, a lot of schools offer iPads these days, but there's another shift in terms of how learning happens, and that will go through all the way from primary, secondary to tertiary education. And if you were to say to me, if you could put two things into the curriculum, what would there be that I don't see? Is project planning. Actually, that's the one thing in the curriculum I don't see. We talk a lot about creativity, but in order to be actually creative and for the challenges we have in the future, we have to deliver things. We have to produce things. We have to have, we're all going to be blessed, I think, with, there'll be more sort of portfolio careers, but a lot of those will be the kind of, like everyone's been given a blank piece of paper and going, right, fill this, or you're going from A to Z. How do you do that? How do you work as a team? How do you make this thing happen? And I don't see enough of that in terms of project planning. I say to people, students, have you used a Gantt chart? What's that? Okay, so what's going on at school? I'd like people to know about project planning, and I think that in a way schools have to do what parents do. It's those wonderful moments when the only way I can describe it is when you've got a child and they're learning to cycle. They've got training wheels to take training wheels off, or you might be holding the back of the bike, giving them a little push, and there's this beautiful moment when they're cycling on their own. And they might look back over their shoulder, and it's a look like, I don't need you. So I think all through life there's these milestones where people go, I'm pedaling on my own, and it's that drive. We talk about resilience, but we don't talk about drive. I think that's the one thing that we should talk about in schools is drive and project planning. I'm going to leave it at that.
I couldn't agree more. Someone had explained to me what strategy was the other day, and I was they were gassed I didn't know, and I was like, oh, no one told me that word. So if we've got 6 minutes left, so thank you for that. And Cindy, your sort of thoughts on this just in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is what I said already. If I looked out into 2041, I would love enrichment to be embedded in curriculum from early years. And actually,
there's a question about that actually in the Slido. How important will behaviours and attitudes of students be? Should this be a focus in enrichment?
Yeah. So I think that because the question is, what in 20 years' time? What do I hope it looks like? Yeah, that's the question. Just because this topic is so broad. So I think enrichment and empathy, that stuff. The second is that actually digital increasingly empowers young people and adults to take ownership for their own learning and makes it truly accessible so they can respond to the changing world. The third, and I think this links to what Sunita said, which is as well as being values driven, I really hope that we value the right things in terms of the jobs that Sunita was talking about, but also choice and pathways around education, so vocational. And the fourth thing for me, and actually it links to what Chester said, it's diversity, equity and inclusion, because we know that STEM and technology related careers and subjects are less taken up by girls and women. And as the world moves forward, if that's what it's going to look like, if we don't address it now, then we could have quite a big gap in terms of female and women progression in that brave new world with these brave new technological careers. So I think thinking about that now as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and diversity, in fact, there's a session later on for everyone who's watching on diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And so in the last couple of minutes, Charlotte, you've got 1 minute to tell us your thoughts for that.
Okay, so much to cram in. But I mean, I think critical thinkers, I think sort of whether they're 16-year-olds or 5 right now, digital diligence is so important, just not that acceptance, critical thinking, and also that sense of who am I and where am I going? I think with mental health, and I really believe in this bridge between the academic and pastoral sides of school lives. And I think this bridge in the sense of understanding and deepening your own self-knowledge and awareness, it's going to increase social intelligence and emotional intelligence and empathy in classrooms. And in a world of robots and AI, I think human skills is where schools need to focus, because just learning by rote, I don't necessarily think is going to be what we need in the future. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I can agree with more the sort of the way of thinking, and there's amazing studies to show, sort of kids left alone will actually work out how to think as a group. The minds are amazing. We've got about sort of 3 minutes left. So I was going to say, Chess, I didn't give you a last word, so please have a minute to sort of have any last words before I sum up for everybody.
Yeah, I think, as I say, because of being a parent of a 20 and 18-year-old, there's certain life skills that just aren't being taught at school at all. And we actually just did a big article with the HMRC about paying taxes and how do you open a bank account. And when a lot of these kids are streaming and influencing and getting donations online, but what that actually means is people are paying you money and you have to pay tax for it. But a lot of people don't know that. So we actually are educating our members and people that are playing esports. Even though someone donates and gives you some money, you actually have to pay tax on it. So I would like to see more life skills, especially you finish your GCSEs or you finish your BTEC or you finish your A-level. Before you leave an academic institution, there should be a week of learning of, right, you're now, I hate the word becoming an adult, but you're becoming an adult responsible. That I'd like to see more. And at the end of, picking up what Sunita said about the wheels coming off, independence is the greatest gift you can give your child. And I'm very lucky that I was given an opportunity, during my education to be very independent. And so I'd like to encourage more of that. But my summary about the future and everything is, if we can deliver jobs that people are passionate about, that would be great. And I'm very lucky I work in an industry where we're empowering people with skills to become entrepreneurial, to run their own businesses in esports.
I couldn't agree more. Another thing that I have lots of discussions with people about is things like social entrepreneurship and whether that should be taught as well as a skill. And, I definitely wish someone, I haven't really used a quadratic equation since I was 15, but I have needed tax. But, I did love my education. So, this is sort of where we've come to, we know the future is going to be uncertain. We know it's going to be driven by technology, but also it's got to be human first. And all these things we've talked about, no one should get left behind in terms of technology. We've got the digital divide is really important. And we've got to navigate that well, as this sort of piece around diversity and inclusion, because obviously we want to be a global society. And we know that, every single job in collaboration, its collective intelligence is leveraged by diversity, but only if people can be empathetic within that. They know how to communicate within that, if people feel that they belong. So I encourage everyone to go to the next session on diversity and inclusion. And then, of course, we have these human skills. We have empathy, this enrichment idea, because, it is going to be technology creativity driven, but also value driven as well. You know, we need to be critical thinkers with these human skills so that we can go out there and teach young people to be passionate about the future, you know, to be creators and builders of the future. And our job really is to help them co-create that future, because we'll be long gone when they're 100 and tackling the future of the world. So there's 30 seconds left for me just to say to everyone, go and check out the agenda, because there's wonderful talks and keynotes happening, and do, you know, join the conversation. And just a huge thank you really to all of you, to Cindy, to Charlotte, to Sunita and Chester for coming and sharing this space. And I feel really positive afterwards. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
It's my great honour to welcome you all.
It is a very prestigious award. It means the world to me.
They have great senses of humour.
I like to reveal parts of history to them, for I love making history come alive.
They are some of the best people that you can come across.
To help them open their hearts.
I always come back to this quote. How can we be role models to learners if we're not learners ourselves?
It's quite useful to get out of our bubbles, not our COVID ones, and sort of see what else is out there.
By sharing best practice, we can see the whole picture. We can see what really matters.
One of the biggest brains around.
It's easy to forget how much has to happen behind the front lines.
As a global schools group, Cognita educates over 55,000 students across 12 countries. We're proud to be Wellbeing Partner at this year's Festival of Education, and we want to share the work that we're doing to prioritise children's well-being. This starts with a clear understanding of what well-being is. We looked at the evidence and created a simple Be Well charter that everyone can use day to day. It gives a clear definition of well-being and then focuses on specific contributors that influence it. Discover our full Be Well charter video and other resources to use with your students and families at cognita.com.
I really try to not look at myself as just a science teacher. I feel like as a teacher, it's very important to help students grow and develop outside of your lessons. A single teacher believing in you and really believing in you. One teacher doing that can have a large impact, but if you have one or two or three all telling you that and really, really believing in it, it makes you feel like you can achieve anything in the world, honestly.